This is the Better Ottawa Municipal Panel. Today is Friday, the 6th of June. We're here to talk about recent events at Ottawa City Hall. My name is Neil Saravandamutu. As always, I'm joined by John Willing and Joanne Chianello. Hello to you both.
Hello, Neil. Hey, John.
Hi, guys.
So we're back from our live show last week. What did you think of the experience of doing a live show?
Just last week. It seems so long ago. That was really fun. It was so great. I can't believe how many people came up and said, I listened to the podcast, and I guess I should not be thinking, why? Why do you? But it was great, actually, to people who seem to say that people passed it to them or just mentioned in passing that they should, listen to it, or a lot of people who knew it from your Substack, of course, Neil. So it was great. Yeah. I thought it was really fun.
Yeah. John?
Yeah, no, I had, like Joanne, I had many people come up to me afterwards and talk about the podcast and, talk about city issues and what's going on in their neighborhoods too, which is really great and enlightening. People are wondering, generally about how to get more involved and move the issues at City Hall.
Yeah.
So people certainly at the event were very engaged, obviously, in local government and municipal issues, and it was great to see.
Yeah. I have to admit, I felt a little bit more, had to be on my best behavior in front of a live audience. We didn't quite have the luxury of saying, let's re-record that bit or whatever, right?
Yeah, no, well, that wasn't needed. You're very smooth. And plus, you were on all the time, right? We just had our one panel, but you, Neil, were in like all of the sections, doing all the things. So I thought it went really well, and I hope we do it again.
Great. Okay. Well, listen, there are some big issues that have been coming up at City Hall, including, so the city is debating allowing alcohol in parks. Now, John, can you get us started and tell us what's being proposed here?
One thing, we should be in a park having some drinks doing the pod, right?
Yeah, that's our next live event. Will be
to Lansdowne Park. Yeah. So the city, it promises allowing cities to make these decisions now about whether they want to allow more alcohol consumption in public places. And so the city has put its mind to that and thinking about whether it's a good idea to allow alcohol in parks. And brass tacks is they're going to leave it up to councillors to propose parks in their wards that might be good candidates for allowing drinking. So I'm curious to see what councillors say and if they, identify parks in their wards for drinking.
Yeah. So Joanne, is this a good idea or not, allowing alcohol in parks?
Well, I don't know. I mean, so I love drinking, I would say, like not to excess, of course. I have a sommelier certification, and so not that you have to have wine tasting in the parks, but you know what I mean. Like I enjoy having a glass of wine, G&T in the summer. I'm sure people like to have a beer. Do you need to drink everywhere you go? I really don't know. And so I would say, like, look in Toronto. Toronto started this ages ago. They've been talking about it since 2019. I think they started in 2023. And at the time, I think they expected to have more like calls from like city bylaw to parks. That did not happen, right? They added 9 parks this year. They're up to 54 parks. It does not seem to be causing a problem there. So, I think it's great to give people more choice. Is it the pressing issue of our time? No. But I think it's probably fine. It's just the whole part about getting councillors to nominate their parks puts them in, I think, a tricky situation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, I don't know what you guys think about that, but it's like, do you want to be seen as the councillor pushing alcohol into your park? Like, do you have to ask the community association? Do you have to have a community? Like, it's a weird thing. It's a tricky thing politically, I think.
Well, it is a new process. John, what are your thoughts? Are you in favor?
I have no problem with it. Even I think back during the pandemic and going to the park with other parents with small kids, you didn't have much to do except go to the park and maybe have a pint too at the same time in the park. So I think it's going to happen whether there's regulation formally or not. People are doing it already.
Yeah.
And so I always say to people, if they're interested in having a beer in the park, just don't make it like obvious. Just don't be an open, right?
I do wonder, like, it's this thing where it's if it's not a problem and people are able to do it, like, what is the issue? Do we need to have a formal regulation? Because I'm sure people are going to ask, like, if there are only a few parks where drinking is allowed, is that going to bring partiers? And that'll be the concern. Again, it doesn't seem to have happened in Toronto, but is that going to happen here? Like, there's going to be a lot of worried people.
Yeah. My thoughts when it comes to alcohol in parks, I say just do it. Like, let's
Yeah.
not. There's this tendency to be ultra conservative and worry about the worst case scenario. We've seen this in other cities. We mentioned
Yeah.
Toronto. Vancouver's been doing this also for a couple of years now, and people are respectful for. It's. I can't say I've heard a lot of horror stories from other cities, so I say just do it. But Joanne, to your earlier point about councillors are being asked to nominate parks, and we've had one come forward so far, I believe, right?
Yes, Sean
Why?
Menard.
Yeah, and why are they so reluctant?
Yes, it's the great law. It's the great law, and he was thinking it was a good thing, and because people are gathering there all the time anyway, and it's a real destination kind of park, I think too, not just like your community neighborhood park. Yeah, I don't know. I think actually, I talked to my own counselor who thinks he's going to nominate a couple of parks soon, but I don't know what the process is. I think they are just like. I doubt many people are super against it. From the people I've talked to, it's just that they'd like to not be put in that position. So I don't know actually how. I have to confess, I don't know how the process worked in Toronto, if staff chose the parks or not. But like for example, Ariel Trosser in Somerset Ward said she is not going to nominate Dundonald Park. There's a lot of activity there, let's say, not all of it legal sometimes, and I don't think they want to add drinking to that, right? So I understand that. Yeah, so it's weird. It's like, remember when we had the casino debate? Everyone said casinos were fine, but then everyone also said how they didn't personally gamble. You're like, well, which is it, right? It's like, I'm not against this, but I don't want to be seen to pushing it either, right? And I think that's the problem. They don't want to be seen as like, I am personally bringing drinking to your neighborhood park as your counselor. Politically weird.
I just quickly, like, I'm curious to know what councillors will do in wards where there's what I would call destination parks, like Mooney's Bay and Britannia, Petrie Island, Lansdowne Park, because you do get a tendency to get a lot of people there, right, on the weekend, beautiful day.
Yeah.
So and it's not like you're encouraging alcohol drinking, but if you're saying yes, everyone, you can drink here. What's the culture? Is there gonna be a culture change at those parks? So I hope people who are out drinking in parks don't ruin it for everyone else who wants to just go for a little small bottle of wine or a pint or something like that. So hopefully everyone's on the best behavior.
Yeah.
Already, actually, it's interesting you said that, because already I believe it was Councillor Matthew Luloff on Orleans, talking about Petrie Island, saying doesn't think, and I hope I have the right councillor here, but was saying that water recreation and drinking maybe don't mix. So I wonder if like at the beach where you really want to have a nice, a tea, maybe, but is there an extra consideration of safety? I don't know.
Yeah.
But I think we'll just try some things. We are the capital of pilot projects, so try pretty hard. See how it goes.
Yeah. My final thought on this is around I see this as an affordability measure. It's just so expensive going out these days, and particularly going out to drink, going out to a bar, and being able to pick something up now at your local grocery store. And just being able to go with or a corner store and being able to go to the park with your friends is, just an affordability measure that we haven't really had access to.
That's really, just quickly on that, because you made me think of, you think there's going to be any static from small businesses, small restaurateurs who might, to your point, Neil, it's expensive to go out, but is there a possibility, guys, that small businesses might take issue with this if you expand alcohol consumption in places that you don't need a permit, for example? I just wonder. It's a rhetorical question.
Maybe you'll have to have parks that are far away from like
a buffer zone, right?
Okay, I hope not.
Food truck, but it could be near a restaurant. I'm sure we'll have a lot of rules.
Okay, enough about booze in parks. Let's move on to a much more serious issue for the city, and that is capital asset management plans. So, Joanne, earlier this week, the Finance Committee considered these capital asset management plans, and that describes the cost of infrastructure that we have and the cost of renewing and keeping all that infrastructure in good shape. So, can you tell us a little bit, can you set the scene for us here, Joanne, in terms of the costs and how much infrastructure do we have? How much is it going to cost to renew all that?
Yeah, so of course the city has a ton of stuff, right? Like physical stuff. And it is worth more than $90 billion with a B, of course. But it's hard to know what some of it is. Like, obviously we see buildings like our community centers, rec centers, city hall, offices, that kind of stuff. There's the roads, of course, but there's also things like daycare facilities, long-term care homes, a lot of stuff we don't see, sewers, water pipes, the stuff underground. So that's a lot of stuff. And when we talk about assets, sometimes people talk about the value of assets, but when you're talking about municipal infrastructure, like it's not like you can sell that stuff on eBay, right? Like I'm dating myself now, probably Facebook Marketplace, but like they're like, yes, of course the sewers are water and water waste infrastructure has value to it, costs a lot of money, but it doesn't have like a market value, right? So it's a little bit weird to talk in those sense. Like you can't talk about it like your house, owning your house, that kind of thing. And
Joanne, this is a great point, and we're going to come back to it. This idea of like they're assets, they're called assets, but they're really liabilities. But before we do that, I do want to talk more about that. But I just want John. I just want to turn to John for a sec. So sorry, go ahead, Joanne.
I was going to say how much we are behind on it, though. So we own $90 billion of it.
Yes.
And of course, we have to maintain it, keep it in good repair, and of course, add to it as we get more people in the city. The city grows as we add more land to the city. And in the next 10 years, we're going to be short $11 billion. That's called an infrastructure gap. There's always been one. And right now, like the city has had to put together this very comprehensive list. Because of new rules from the province, and what they have told us is that over the next 10 years we are going to be, I would say, at least $11 billion short of what we need to keep this stuff in okay shape.
Okay, so we have an $11 billion gap over the next 10 years, only. So John, can you explain the process for how we go about deciding how we're going to fill that funding shortfall?
Sell the sewers. No, you can't sell the sewers. No, so look, you have to use the revenue streams that you have. So for people who, all the underground pipes, the sewers, the water pipes, our plants, are paid through people's water bills, the rate budget, and so we've already hearing word that water bills will have to go up over as they have been every year, pretty much for a long time now, over the next 10 years or probably longer than that, to pay for all the infrastructure renewal, at least as much as we can, but also there's going to be, tax-supported money that comes into this, and we're looking forward to the long-range financial plans that will be coming out. I don't know what the timeline is. Is it the fall, guys?
I think so.
That we're going to need a plan, right? We're going to have to see a plan about how the city is going to pay for as much of the renewal as possible. And it's interesting because the city report talks about how there's no risk right now to the assets. They're in fine shape, of course, until something happens, right? And so you don't know the problem with the pipes under the ground is you kind of have an idea about their age and the state they're in until something happens. Until
remember
you have to
the Elgin water main?
Exactly, or the water mains in the East End that broke. So, so right now the city doesn't seem too concerned, but like the money is going to be a concern, I think, for council. Are they going to have to talk about how much tax money we're bringing in? It's going to have an infrastructure levy of some kind, just a higher tax to pay for all this, what is deferred maintenance, right?
Yeah. So, Joanne, can I just turn to you for a sec? Because, John, you've talked about rate and you've talked about tax. Joanne, can you just remind everyone what the difference is between those two things, rate and tax, and how we are going to go about filling this gap? What your thoughts are?
Yeah, good luck. So the rates are bills that you pay on things like mostly water, right? So that's the rate paid. This is like the water that comes in their house, including your drinking water, but also the water that is flushed down the toilet, the storm sewer system that we have, things like I'm forgetting the name of it, the big tanks that hold the water.
Culverts.
So no, but the huge ones, so that we don't flush
reservoirs.
Into the river when there's a downpour, that kind of stuff. And that actually has to, like, by law, has to be paid through the water rate bills. Like, we can't take tax money that you pay for your property taxes to put onto that, because what was happening in the past, well before that, is that politicians want to keep taxes low, and what they did was they just basically starved the water supply system of actual updates, and now we're paying for it now. In fact, I had this argument with Bob Shirelli a couple years ago, where he boasts that like left that they kept like water rates had not increased for years. And I'm like, well, that was not that helpful actually in the end. So this is what we're seeing, and we're hearing now things about 4.5% to 5.5%. They're going to go up every year possibly to pay for that. That is a huge amount.
Yeah.
As well, it's not just deterioration. There's climate change that has really intensified the deterioration of some of these assets. On the other side, you have things like roads and community centers and that sort of stuff. It is paid for by their taxes. And we don't charge enough for taxes to pay for all of these things. And that has always been the case. Well, it's been the case since I've been watching it, and probably it's always been the case. There's also talk this week of borrowing $1.7 billion. So to add to the debt to renew some of these assets, again, we will repay that debt mostly through our taxes as well. So that's the difference. But basically, this money has to come from us. And I think that is an issue because I think that there's, there's a huge problem across the province. Yes, this is a problem for us. And as a city, we need to take responsibility for ourselves. But we're not the only ones. Across the province, there's municipalities as a whole are facing at least $50 billion in debt in an infrastructure gap across the whole province for the next decade. Although that seems low because I can't imagine that we're 1/5 of that. So yeah, it's a huge problem.
Yeah. So I just want to recap here. So we're talking about a $10 billion deficit over the next. $11 billion deficit over the next 10 years.
Yes.
And what we had this week was, this is my water bill. And that's that's what we call rate supported. Right. And that covers all the sewers and all the wastewater as Joanne's described. Mm-hmm. And that is going to go up that bill is going to go up by 5% a year for the next 10 years. I think 5% every year, right?
Yes. So it's cumulative,
Yeah, and we're going to be taking out $1.7 billion in debt, you said, Joanne. And that's just to take care of the water stuff, right? So all the roads and all the recreation centers and all the fire stations and everything, like all the other infrastructure, that is going to be supported through our taxes, as you say. And we don't really know yet how we're going to pay for that. And I think, as you mentioned, John, that's probably coming back to council in the fall, right?
Yeah, they have to have a plan, a game plan, right? And one of the most interesting things I think is to follow. There's some language in the report that talks about service, the level of service that's being provided by these assets, and so that's where the rubber is going to hit the road. Probably not specifically the roads, but I'm wondering more like soft assets, like community centers, or I guess the hard set. So, like, are we talking about service hours, a community? Like, how is the taxpayer, the citizen, going to be impacted by an infrastructure deficit? So when I say they're going to look at changes to service delivery, those are warning words for me, kind of like optimization. And so what's that going to look like at the places we love, parks, community centers, things that service the citizenry every day?
Yeah. And I mean, Joanne, what's your take on that? Is that is Belltown Arena, which, was an arena that has basically been, for all intents and purposes, shut down now,
right?
Ahead of life. Is that the future for a lot of these, service efficiencies?
Yeah, I think that's the fear for a lot of places. I mean, if you look, I don't think they have I was looking around for a facility by facility rating. I don't see that. But under parks and culture, outdoor assets, I don't know what you guys think of it, but I think that's like parks and, tennis courts and things like that. 39% are very poor, very poor. That's the lowest rating. That is really, you can't use this stuff, right? And people will say tennis courts, basketball courts, things like that. This is the basic stuff that people want in their city. If I can just give a quick personal thing, I was at the Kitchissippi Ward Forum the other day, and we were hearing that people were complaining that they can't get a water fountain in their parks because we can't pay to maintain it every year, right? And you think, that is not what people want from their taxes. They want, as you say, John, those are the things that people love. That's what brings us together. That's what we need to do. In my own, actually, I was going to say in my own ward, but actually it's across the street from where John lives, Tom Brown Arena. What's going to happen there? I mean, Belltown Arena was considered fair just a little while ago. And I have to say, a lot of the assets are considered fair. fare is not good. Like it is basically deteriorating and it's a short trip, right? From fare to stuff being shut down.
Well,
so I think that we're in for a big reckoning if we're going to talk about things in a serious way. We're not going to get, but then people never want to do it. Like the snow removal, like we're $20 billion in deficit in our snow removal. So when you talk about what kind of service deliveries are we going to have so that we can have enough money to do things, that is not a thing people want. And I know I'm mixing up assets and services, but the money comes from one big pot. And so where is it going to come?
Well, the other implication is, take your example of tennis courts. Once we stop maintaining tennis courts and become unusable, what actually happens to that property, right? Like the temptation to sell it becomes extremely high, right? And so we don't know what the future is going to look like. We don't know whether selling these assets is part of the plan yet or not. But that should be a real concern for a lot of communities.
I have to say that seems politically untenable. I don't see who gets to do that. Whoever wants to, I guess, not get reelected, because that is going to be a terrible, terrible decision.
Yeah. Okay. So, John, I want to ask you about. There was one public delegation that by a fellow named Jamie Murchison. Now he came out with some remarkable graphs and maps that showed it showed on a map where our infrastructure deficits are, both over the next 10 years, but also beyond the next 10 years. And to be honest, it was kind of frightening to think that we've got this $11 billion deficit over the next 10 years. But what Jamie was saying is that beyond 10 years is it's like a whole other world, right? A whole other world of pain. But Councillor Brown asked, why can't we get this sort of information from the city itself? So why can't we? Why is it up to a public delegation to take time out of their day to do all this research, to have to present the information in a clear manner to city councillors?
Well, I bet you the next time we talk about assets, you're going to see a little bit of different visualization from the city. Maybe they should contract Jamie to do some of the visualization stuff. But I mean, seriously, to your point, Neil. Yeah, I mean, look, the city can do that. They could do it for sure. It takes time, I'm sure. It takes resources to do it. They could do it. But maybe it takes a wise citizen to come bring something like this to council for then the city to replicate that kind of effort too internally.
Yeah. Okay. So we want to say, Jamie, thank you for your service.
Way to go, Jamie.
Way to go, Jamie.
But Joanne, I mean, it does point to this bigger question that when we think about all this infrastructure do we have too much infrastructure for the size of our population?
Well, I don't know. I mean, if we do, then so does every other city, right? People have this problem. The problem is people want to build things and then we don't build into our tax system what it's going to cost to maintain it. I always think that we need a parliamentary budget office for the city. Not just actually, I wrote that in my survey of the Auditor General. We shouldn't just audit things after the fact. We need to say, okay, what is this actually going to add to our system and how does this pay for it? And so when we add things I know we're talking about adding new lands, right? Okay, there's going to be roads, they're going to be paid for by the new homeowners and through development charges, things like that. But do we have enough of a tax base afterwards to maintain all of that? We don't do that math. And it's easy to steal things. When it's coming up to renewal, but it's still pretty good and we're short on everything else, it's easy to put that off. And you see politicians do it all the time. Actually, I say you see it, you don't, because it's very non-transparent, but it is what happens all the time. And this is why you have a huge, out of I think it was 2011, there's a giant, we're at City Hall and there's a giant water main break, in Elgin, and had to shut it on Elgin Street and had to shut it down because that's what happens. So I don't know. Yeah. Do we have too much? I don't know. But we need stuff. We can't really do without sewers and waters and roads and the parks, and that is what actually adds to our quality of life. So we need some of that.
So John, I want to ask you another process question, and that is, the city gave councillors and the public a huge amount of information around these capital asset management plans just a couple of days before the meeting, right? Maybe a week before the meeting. And it's just this massive volume of information. And they gave the same release dates that they would with any other council report, right? No matter how trivial that council report versus something that's much more serious and much more impactful to the long term, has long-term impacts on everyone. So should we be rethinking how much time we give councillors and the public to consider these major documents?
I mean, I think it's worth thinking about like major reports, like the capital asset management plan is a huge report, as you say. I can think of some Lansdowne reports that are pretty big that could use some time to mull. Certainly, if you're a council member. So
Yeah.
maybe there needs to be some thought by committee chairs to ask staff to maybe bring these forward in advance. Usually, I think the chair usually gets more information than other members of the
Yeah.
committee in advance, so they're well informed and be able to prepare for meetings. But those counselors usually get the information the same time the public does. And there's always been, I know, debates in the past whether council members should get these reports first before they're put public, so there's no surprises, so they can prepare for what the public is going to say when those
They're
reports
just going to leak
drop.
them.
They're just going to leak them, and it's happened before, right?
Yeah,
When they used to have a little bit of a different process. But just to your point, Neil, I think it's worth thinking about if there's a big major report, and I would consider this a major report. We're talking about the assets, $90 billion of assets. It's worth putting it out maybe another maybe 2 weeks in advance. That said, I know like we want, I think back to my journalism school days, and I had a professor who said, "Don't tell me the olds, tell me the news." So we want the newest information possible in those reports. We don't want old information, and for me, like even a week is another week older. So that's the balance that I think the city and staff are trying to make.
But not
Okay.
for something like the asset management report.
No.
Like a week is not going to make a difference on that. And actually, to be fair, some Lansdowne reports under the old council did actually come earlier, right? They put them out earlier, and they would have a technical briefing. And this one, I think, is an interesting one to have that as well, like because it is a lot of money and it is really important. So.
Okay.
Yes,
Well, listen,
I agree.
You have both mentioned Lansdowne, and this is our third topic today. And earlier this week at Finance Committee, again, Councillor Menard introduced a motion to say that
it was a heck of a meeting. Like it was a giant meeting. Yeah.
Yeah. So listen, at the end of that meeting, Councillor Menard introduced a motion to say, I want to talk about something next meeting, okay, which is going to happen at the end of June. And what he said he wanted to talk about was holding a referendum on Lansdowne. And this is, it's kind of standard practice that you introduce a motion, you introduce notice of a motion in one meeting to say we're going to talk about it next month.
Right.
Now, what was unusual was that Councillor Kathy Curry came in and said, this is so urgent, we need to talk about it right now. And Councillor Menard's response to that was, look, this is just a clear, transparent attempt to prevent public delegations from being able to delegate on this issue. So, there's two issues here. One is, should we have a referendum? And number two is, should people be given the opportunity to speak about this? So, John, maybe we could just start with that first question. Should there be, for a big item like Lansdowne, should we be considering putting this to a popular vote?
I don't mind the debate at council about the idea of referenda in general. I don't personally like the idea of a referendum on Lansdowne. I just don't know where it stops. I mean, could you say if we're going to have a phase 3 of LRT, should we have a referendum on that? Should we have a referendum on how we spend capital asset deferred maintenance money? Like, there's so much money being spent at the city, and I get Lansdowne is a very public project.
Yeah.
But there are many, many different big spending, important public projects that I think we hire or we elect our councillors to go out and consult their constituents and bring that intel back to council. And that's where the debate happens, and that's where the vote happens. So I'm kind of cool to the idea of having referenda on issues such as Lansdowne Park.
Joanne, before you jump in, I just have to come in with a disclaimer that I've actually been pushing this idea of a referendum at Lansdowne. I've been quite active on this front. Yes. So just in full disclosure.
I doubt that anybody who is watching this podcast does not know that, but yes, yeah. That's good to say. Yeah, and I mean, I get it, but I think I'm a little bit more to John's side that, do we have a referendum for every big issue? Lansdowne was actually part of the last election issue. Now, the price has gone up since then, so from what people were thinking then. And there has not been a final decision. There will be one in October on the financing and whether it should go ahead. People will have a chance to speak at the time. And so I think if there's something that has come up since the last election that was completely out of the blue that people were not able to weigh in on in some way, you might see that happening as well. It's very expensive to have a referendum that is not like at the same time as the election. So I mean, would this referendum be happening like next fall in 2026? That seems a bit late. So I probably, if I were there, I would probably vote against having the referendum. But I sure as heck would not have voted to like shut down debate and not have the motion come to council, or come to the committee the next week. That was ridiculous.
Yeah.
I have to agree with Sean on this, that it was obviously an attempt to we don't want to hear a bunch of people who don't like Lansdowne come to committee, which is, I'm sorry if you don't have to agree with those people, but it is your job to listen to them. And the fact that the way that happened was, I thought, really bad process.
Yeah, John, just last word on process. Yeah.
I thought it was it reminded me of the Watson council years. Watson was very smart with process, right?
Oh yeah.
So I don't know, Joanne, maybe have we seen another councillor move to put a notice on the table for that meeting? I don't think I've ever seen that before.
I'm not.
Well,
I have seen it, but I mean, I've had.
Yeah, Teresa Kavanaugh on
Okay.
Tailwind.
Yeah. So I thought, you know what, interesting political move for the councillors who wanted to get this Lansdowne thing done. And so the context, they talked about how there's some construction RFP dates coming up, and they use that as a rationale. I'm not saying for better or for worse, that was the rationale they used as to why they wanted to deal with the Menard referendum idea at that time.
Yeah, it was nonsensical and did not hold up. It did not hold water, that argument. You could obviously still have a debate in 2 weeks at the committee meeting without, no one was saying you should halt the RFP until we decide whether we're having a referendum like that. No one said that. So it was a ludicrous argument that nobody was buying.
Yeah, and I guess my last comment on this is Councilman Menard did ask the question as this discussion was happening, say, well, it sounds like you've already made up your mind on Lansdowne, that this is a done deal, and yet we were told that the final vote on this comes in October. So listening to the city manager respond to that was, there's a lot of interesting things we need to think about. It was a bit of a non-answer as to, is this a done deal, and so that was a bit disappointing to hear.
Yeah. But I do say that people who are the 4,000 of you and 5,000
5,000,
my apologies, come on out in October. There is a lot of chance, an opportunity to make yourself heard in this debate. Absolutely, 5,000 people at the City Hall, I'll get in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, undoubtedly there will be a lot of people that will want to delegate on Lansdowne when it comes back to a vote in October, as happened the last big time, which was November of 2023. But but I think this is an issue that is
people don't, people can do things, ahead of that as well. It's just, I know it's hard. A referendum is a much more obvious moment where you can, get a sense of what people believe. But I would love to see some real polling, not actual neutral polling. With some numbers. Right? That's what I think. It's we get people polling oh, do you agree with Lansdowne or not? And you're but okay, but what are the details of that, right? I would love to see some actual sense of what the city knows about it and what they actually think about it.
Well, yeah, and you know what? To that point, Joanne, I think there's a pretty high probability that if we told people that this is going to cost $500 million, there's a decent chance it's going to run over budget too, that the financials will not hold up, and that this is not something we need to do right now. That stadium is good for another 40 years with maintenance. I think people would say, you know what, maybe not right now. It's the time to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
That means it's time for the lightning round.
Lightning.
Okay, so 60 seconds. So let's start with you, Joanne. Renee Amilcar, the head of OC Transpo, has announced that she will be leaving shortly to head up a new Quebec agency, Mobilité Infra Quebec. Mm-hmm. So looking back, what's your thoughts on Renee's performance?
Well, I have to say I always personally liked Renee. She came in with the transit was a mess. She had a really hard job. There was a lot of controversy over the LRT. I did not overlap with her too long while I was a reporter until 2023. I think that job is really hard because you can only do so much with whatever council gives you.
Yeah.
And council, what they need to give you is more money. They don't have any money, or they don't want to give you the money, right? And so I thought she had a very nice way about her, and I know that especially at the beginning, morale improved under her. I don't think she probably loved the new ways to bus, because new ways to bus are fewer ways to bus. So I always feel a little bit badly with bureaucrats, because they cannot make up money. They cannot have tools, and and I think from what I heard, she ran the system fairly well. She had a lot of bus experience as well, so I think that the bus side of it, folks liked her. But the LRT woes or the uncertainties around them continue. But still, under Renee, we saw line 2. The Trillium line open, and it went well. So there you go.
Okay. All right, John, over to you. City. So the city has tasked staff with drafting a bubble bylaw over the next 9 months, and that's a bylaw that limits the right to protest around vulnerable social infrastructure, so things like schools and churches. Now, of note, other cities, including Toronto and Calgary, have got these bubble bylaws in place already and are facing charter challenges. So given all that, actually one third point. So staff have also said that if they're going to put effort into preparing a bubble bylaw, they will not be able to put effort into preparing a bylaw for rideshare. And you remember there was the big controversy with the taxi drivers around whether rideshare was introduced properly. So John, did they make the right decision in tasking staff to put their energies into drafting a bubble bylaw?
I've been thinking a bit about this, and I don't really have a great answer for that. But all of that, I do know that rideshare bylaw review is, I think, pretty important. Just covering, and Joanne, you'll remember covering when Uber kind of muscled its way into the city, and then the whole ride sharing legislation or the bylaw that followed at council was super controversial with the taxi sector. So I think,
and also, didn't we lose a class action suit? The city lost a class action suit. I never know what happened to that, but
so there's stuff to review. Absolutely, bubble bylaw. Council's decided is super important, even though there might be some legal implications outside the municipality that could have really national implications, I guess, if it gets in through the court levels. So I don't have a great answer. All I know is the rideshare bylaw. I think it deserves a review. It looks like it might happen now. Next year, possibly? We'll see.
Yeah. Okay. Joanne, on to you. So council received an update this week on Adisoke, which is the new central library on the Breton Flats. So what's the latest? What is the news that we're hearing? When can we expect to see this hopefully open?
So Adisoke is the $334 million central library, which was up from the original $192 million budget. It is supposed to open next summer. And so far, that's still the scheduled date, but we are hearing talks about possible construction delays. And it was frustrating to some councillors because there was just vague talk about construction delays, like maybe some of the contractors they're giving warning signals, because when they were pressed to say okay, can you tell us what kind of delays there are? They're like, well, it's too early to say. So the fact is, we're going to get an update in the fall, and so far it looks, so far they're not changing the opening date, but it could be delayed, by a few months. But we will know once this summer is over.
Okay.
Do I get extra time for my next question then? Because I think I was under.
You're a few seconds under, so sure. John, to you. So the NCC has been opening, or actually, I guess more technically reopening. Oh, sorry.
You bailed yourself.
Yeah, that's right. So the NCC has been opening some quite significant landmark sites. So we've seen Kaweki Point next to the National Art Gallery, up on what used to be Nepean Point, overlooking the Alexander Bridge. That's reopened. Also, Westboro Beach and the Pavilion have reopened. First of all, have you had a chance to see either of these? And secondly, the NCC seems to be doing a lot of heavy lifting here. Is the city pulling its weight in terms of creating great spaces for its residents?
Well, no. Number one, no, I have not been to either of those yet, but I have not heard a discouraging word so far on each of those amenities. So I'm looking forward to go to both of them within the next week, I hope. Neil, the city would suggest that they are making great spaces by redeveloping Lansdowne Park. And maybe that would be their argument. But also, we just had a conversation about, capital asset management too. And when you talk about building things, it's going to come with maintenance costs. And so we're already $11 billion in the hole over 10 years. And so that's part of a greater conversation about buying things we need right now in the city and making things we want. And so I think maybe we're at that the crossroads right now in that argument.
Okay, Joanne, last question to you.
Okay.
One of our listeners asked if we could take the municipal panel on the road. So what do you think about recording some episodes at different community gatherings around the city?
Well, we already had the talk about having one outdoors at one of the drinking parks. So for sure that we should do a summer episode. No, that would be great. I would love to do that. It'd be great to meet people and also to go different places. I mean, like, I'd love to go out to one of the rural communities. You know, at ERAC, they had 60 people show up over the battery storage issue. It was huge, like controversial talk that I think we're going to talk about next week, right? But like, so yeah, that's like, it's a huge city. Let's get out there.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe actually we can just use that as if there's any community associations or community groups out there that would like to see us in their neck of the woods, please let us know and let's make that happen. Okay, that's it. Yeah, that's it for this week. I want to thank John and Joanne. I'd like to thank everyone for listening. Please review us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you find your podcasts. We will be back next week. And until then, this has been the Better Ottawa Municipal Panel.